Jimmy Tingle is a renowned comedian and social commentator who uses his wit to shed light on the pressing issues of our time. He was born in Cambridge into a Catholic working-class family, which influenced his humor, which he's going to talk more about today. Welcome, Jimmy.
Good morning, everybody. Excellent to be here this morning. Thank you so much, Joe, for inviting me. Thank you so much, Naomi, for inviting me originally. And we had so much fun last night. Just by a show of hands, how many people were here last night? Okay, almost everybody. Okay. I might repeat some things, but I just wanted to, the name of this talk is Humor for Humanity. And it's basically how I got into trying to use humor and entertainment for purposes beyond just humor and entertainment. 1968, April 4th, I was in St. Mary's Church in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and we were in confirmation. Rehearsal. Confirmation in Catholicism. I'm not that familiar with Unitarianism yet, but you become an official soldier of Christ. That's kind of the premise. You're old enough to make a decision to follow that path. I don't know how many people really are old enough to do that at 14 or 13, but that's what we were anyway. So we're all there assembled in St. Mary's, and it's very quiet, and all of a sudden these nuns start crying. And these are the nuns with the habits, and they're running up and down the aisle very quickly, and they were crying. And apparently they had just heard that Martin Luther King had been assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee that afternoon. And I doubt if anybody, I know I did not know who Martin Luther King was, but anyway, it was a real turning point for the country and for the world, really. So fast forward, Martin Luther King clearly was a soldier of Christ, or a soldier of goodness. And fast forward 20 years approximately. I had been a comic at that point for about 7 years, working primarily in Boston. And friends started to die from alcohol and drugs. I personally felt like I was dying. And my friends died from not pleasant circumstances, tragic circumstances. And I started to call places for help, and I talked about this a little bit last night. And a week before Christmas, 1987, I called the hospital, the Cambridge City Hospital, having gotten the runaround from many people, many, detoxes and rehabs and things like that. And the man said, I said, I need help. And this man said, you called the right place. And what a pleasant, uplifting surprise that was to hear. You called the right place. So I went into that hospital and I stayed 7 days. I went to Mass on Christmas. It was a week before Christmas. Christmas morning, 1987, I went to Mass for the first time in many, many years. And it was interesting. The priest who said the Mass, his nickname was Mo, and this is in my neighborhood. He was actually a member of the Cambridge Y, where I was also a member. So he didn't know I was having problems. I didn't even know there was a chapel at that hospital. And my 8th grade teacher was in the service as well. She was, a parishioner, and her sister, Miss Stacy. So anyway, it was kind of odd to meet 2 people that I knew growing up in that service. But anyway, so I got out, and I had to get away from Boston. I had to get away from the old neighborhood, so I moved to New York. And a friend of mine there, I met a kid that was also a recovering alcoholic, and he said, Jimmy, why don't you ask, I could not stop drinking. I mean, it was very difficult. He goes, start asking God to help you stop drinking. He goes, get on your knees in the morning and ask God to keep you away from a drink or a drug, and then get on your knees at night and thank God for keeping you away from a drink or a drug. So I started to do this, and I started to be able to be separated from alcohol for the first time since I was 17. And I drank every day from 17 to 32, I think I was, 33. But anyway, I didn't have a theoretical belief in God. I had evidence. I had a change of personality, a change of outlook, a change of habit. I had physical evidence, which was hugely important. And he said if I got sober, I could do really well in comedy. And a year later, and I talked about this last night, but a year later, to the week that I went into that hospital, I got a spot. I got so lucky, I got a spot on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. And that was like life-changing, because that was the gold standard for entertainers. And I had only been doing comedy about 8 years, I think, at that point. So that was a major thing. And because of that, I got an agent and I got a manager, and I was in the business anyway, and I got bookings. And so I got booked in Chicago and San Francisco, and at one point I got booked to Atlanta that same year. This is now 1989, and the wall came down, and there was a very uplifting feeling in the country and in the world that, the Soviet Union had broken apart, and there was going to be this freedom and this democracy and this spreading of freedom, really, in the world. That was the thinking at the time. There was going to be a peace dividend because we no longer had the Soviet Union to contend with. So when I was in Atlanta, I went to see Martin Luther King's house. And he had a really cool house, and right down the street from his house was the Ebenezer Baptist Church, where he did all his sermons. And next to the Ebenezer Baptist Church, there was an establishment called the King Center, the King Freedom Center. And it was a memorial to Martin Luther King. There was a film running about his life and his history and all his speeches. And inside, there was a little bookstore. And I went in, and I saw these books, and boy, there's so many books to choose from. And I picked up this book. It was called The Strength to Love. The Strength to Love by Martin Luther King, Jr. And the reason I bought this book, first of all, it wasn't very big. That's always good. The letters were fairly large. But on the cover it said, by his wife, Coretta Scott King, this book has influenced more people than all of Martin Luther King's works combined. So I said, wow, this is the book for me. Not too big, pretty concise. I'm going to get the message. And the book was a collection of his sermons at the Ebenezer Baptist Church. And what made his sermons so different than anything I had experienced was that the sermons, he was using the gospel to approach social change, specifically racism, income inequality, war, poverty. He was using all this, the speakings of Jesus Christ and the gospel, to apply it to segregation and income inequality and poverty and war and discrimination and poverty and hate in the world. Well, I started to read this thing, and it just opened my eyes completely to the kind of world what we could be. And it reinforced, okay, had this Catholic upbringing, we got these same messages. They weren't always targeted to those specific areas. They were targeted more to, the more Catholic dogma. I mean, the Catholic Church was a beautiful institution, but in my experience growing up, I don't remember it as being really an anti-war organization or even though they do tremendous work with the poor and with immigrants and everything, it wasn't as focused on what I could see at that time as the issues on the front burner of the country. So anyway, so I read this book and I had this amazing experience with that. And then there was another book that I got, and this was really put me in a certain mindset. It was by Forrester Church, who was a Unitarian as well. And this book was God and Other Famous Liberals. It was awesome. It was so awesome because he was going back to the abolitionists. And I read it, 30 years ago, but it was all these examples of people of faith who were changing the society for the better, reinforced by the gospel, taught by the gospel, motivated and reinforced to address the current things right on the front burner in terms of freedom and equality and fairness and justice in the world. This book completely blew me away. So my mind was much different. My mindset was different. When I used to perform my first 7 or 8 years, I was always about drinking. I was always about, you guys gotta drink and party and, F this and F that, and but my mindset changed, my act started to change in big time. And I talked about this last night, but I went to see Jackie Mason, and he was doing a one-person show in New York. And this is the background that what led to Humor for Humanity, which we did last night, was using entertainment for purposes beyond entertainment. That's just a little bit of the backstory that what led to that. And this is an essay that I wrote about Humor for Humanity that I'd like to leave you with. At one point, I grabbed the brass bar, and it seemed to come alive. I was sitting in the front row of the balcony, and the railing was vibrating from the audience reaction. As I watched the great Jewish comedian Jackie Mason deliver nuggets of common gold from the stage of the Broadway theater, I had an epiphany. Like Michelangelo's painting on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, when God touched Adam's finger, and at that moment, as a Catholic, I knew what I wanted to be, a Jewish comic. When Jackie Mason was at the height of his career in 1964, a misunderstanding during his performance on The Ed Sullivan Show caused him to be banned from that spot and much of television. Ed Sullivan claimed Jackie intentionally made an obscene gesture to him when Sullivan signaled him to cut his act short because of an upcoming presidential address. Mason denied the charge, but was nevertheless branded as a problem, and blackballed from television. The incident greatly hurt his career until he reappeared triumphantly on Broadway in the late 1980s. His one-person show, The World According to Me, won a special Tony Award, an Emmy Award, and a Grammy nomination. In the show, I saw Jackie Mason was totally himself, free and vindicated. I had been doing comedy for 9 years at that point, at open mic nights, gong shows, talent contests, and street performing. And I admit there is a fine line between street performing and simply being drunk in public. Over the years, I moved up to the circuit to comedy clubs, colleges, and eventually, after getting sober, to a spot on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. The Tonight Show was the ultimate platform for a stand-up comic. On my first appearance, I performed a politically charged routine, satirizing the war on drugs, congressional opponents of gun control, and the arms for hostage scandal known as the Iran-Contra affair. My closing joke referred to presidential memory loss. Quote, "Folks, I was reading that between Ronald Reagan and George Bush, between the both of them, they still cannot remember whether or not they sold guns to Iran." Mr. President, with all due respect, in the future, if you sell guns to people who take Americans hostage, Jot it down. Despite Johnny's trademark okay sign of approval and the enthusiastic audience response, that was the last joke I ever told on The Tonight Show. They didn't want me back, but after seeing Jackie Mason on Broadway, I had a new career goal, my own one-person show. Driven by the passion to perform and lacking a consistent producer to foot the bill, I invested in myself and learned how to produce my own one-man shows. At one point, I rented the Back Alley Theater in Emmons Square, Cambridge, my old neighborhood. It held about 30 people. On an opening night, 10 minutes before the show started, I peeked through the curtain to see how many family members, friends, or fans had bought tickets. As I said last night, there was one person in the audience, my mother. I looked at her, she looked at me, we both burst out laughing. Mom, I can't believe you're the only person that showed up. Don't worry, your father's parking the car. As the show evolved over the next 10 years, I worked hard to improve the performance, increase the laughs, sharpen the satire, and I did it with the indispensable help of my director, Larry Eric, who has since passed. He was just a tremendous director. As a favor, the artistic director of the Harvard's Hasty Pudding Theater allowed me to rent this historic space during the summer of 1995. We hired a top-notch public relations firm, experienced theater staff, and tech crew. We saturated the Boston market with radio ads and media appearances from May through August of 1995, while most of the other Boston theaters were closed. My director and I rehearsed daily for a month before the show opened. I did interviews in the morning, notes in the afternoon, and performed 4 nights a week for 6 months. It was life-changing. The show was a hit. We got great reviews, and Jimmy Tingle's Uncommon Sense ran for 6 months, becoming the longest-running one-person show in that theater's storied history. It was also a financial home run. I made more money in 6 months of self-producing than I made in all the previous 5 years of working comedy clubs and small theaters. And with newfound confidence, I started to produce my own one-person shows and also comedy fundraisers to help friends who were hurting. We raised $7,000 to help a friend's widow and her children, $20,000 for the 20th anniversary of the Tingle Comedy Club reunion, and a fundraiser for Barry Cremens, who was also sick, our founder. We raised $50,000 for the medical and living expenses for 2 Boston comics suffering from cancer. These events were not part of a larger plan or a goal. They were just a series of one-offs. I got accepted to the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard in 2009, and that would change going to that school. On my application to the Kennedy School, I indicated that I had been producing and/or performing at dozens of fundraisers a year for the last 15 years, helping to raise thousands of dollars for individuals, nonprofits, and political organizations. At the school, I was attracted to social entrepreneurship, the concept of using business practices to affect social change. I dreamed of creating a, quote, show business that could help people and organizations achieve their goals. After graduation, the idea developed into Humor for Humanity, a new social enterprise that raised spirits, funds, and awareness for nonprofits and social causes. Our mission is your mission. Humor for humanity, humor in helping, humor in healing, humor in hope. Ha, ha, ha. Since the pandemic alone, we raised over $250,000 for nonprofits and needy individuals through live and online productions. However, for it to be sustainable, it needs to be more than just a one-man, one-off social enterprise. And I felt if Ed Sullivan could introduce Elvis and the Beatles to America, and Johnny Carson could showcase the actresses in films of Elizabeth Taylor and Bette Midler, why can't I create my own show, my own television show to feature nonprofit leaders and entertainers who champion their causes? On my current podcast, I've interviewed Senator Ed Markey, Maura Healey, comedians Paula Poundstone and Mark Maron about their work and challenges. Imagine a TV show featuring celebrity guests promoting a cause they're passionate about and the challenges they face. Lady Gaga for mental health, Elton John for AIDS, or Matt Damon for clean water. I can see it. I can feel it. Can you? Humor for humanity, more than entertainment, raising spirits, funds, and awareness for nonprofits and social causes. Our mission is their mission. At this point in my life, performing and producing isn't a job or an occupation. It's a calling. I'd just like to leave you now with a prayer that we engaged in last night, and I hope it's an appropriate ending for this sermon. And I want to thank you again, Joe, for asking me to come, and for Naomi, and for everybody here who makes the show last night possible, and for all the people who do all the work behind the scenes who just made it a wonderful experience last night, and keeps this church, this meeting house, functioning. And to all the people on Zoom, you got to come down and check this out. This is an amazing place. God, help us to do what we can, where we can, how we can, with what we can. Because faith without works is dead. So we can build, in the words of Abraham Lincoln, that more perfect union. And the government of the people, and by the people, and for the people, shall not perish from this earth. And when future generations pick up a phone and reach out for help, whether it's healthcare, housing, immigration, education, transportation, human rights, civil rights, reproductive rights, veterans issues, small business issues, or substance abuse disorder, the answer on the other end of that phone always will be, this is America. You call the right place. Amen.
Thank you very much, Jim. We've come to the time when we ask for your contribution to help sustain and grow our meeting house. Whether you are in our beautiful building or with us online or Zoom, our ongoing fellowship and organization continues, and we appreciate your support. We will pass the basket for our offering. Please remember that there is also a separate basket at the back of the meeting house where you can contribute to our monthly community outreach. It's a good time to get that contribution ready to be placed in the basket as you go. We also have a donate button on our website for several different types of offerings, and of course you can also mail a check to the meeting house. The address is on the screen. Whichever you choose and however it arrives, we are grateful for your generosity. And now, for the good of our meeting house and its work, the offering will be graciously received.
Some of you know this service was supposed to happen in September, but it was put off because of the residue of Hurricane Lee. So I get to sing the September song in October. It's a long, long while from May to December, but the days grow short when you reach September, when the autumn weather turns the leaves to flame. One hasn't got time for the waiting game. Oh, the days dwindle down to a precious few. September, November, and these few precious days I'll spend with you. These precious days I'll spend with you. Oh, the days dwindle down to a precious few. September, November, and these few precious days I'll spend with you. These precious days I'll spend with you.
Our closing hymn is number 121, We'll Build a Land. Please rise in body or in spirit in joining us in singing.
We'll build a land where bind up the
I want to just make sure you know that there's coffee downstairs and refreshments. Jimmy, would you be able to join us downstairs for a few minutes?
I very much need a cup of coffee.
You get a little bit more of Jimmy downstairs and coffee.
And great fellowship as well.
Our benediction is from May Sarton. Help us to be the always hopeful gardeners of the Spirit, who know without darkness nothing comes to birth, as without light nothing flowers. And join me in reading the words for the extinguishing the chalice. We extinguish this flame
Good morning.